We all have to have a job in order to make ends meet. But what if your job isn't just a little rude to employees or doesn't quite pay enough? What if they're into something so sinister you would never even guess it? But now that you know it, there's no going back, and they would do anything to silence you. Anything.
What's that? You want to be scared? Come with me. You will experience tales of horror, ghosts, and death. It is not recommended for the weak at heart. Listen in the dark. It's more fun that way. This is Weekly Spooky.
Hello, my spookies. It's Wednesday, and you know what that means. It's time for a little spooky in your weekly. I'm your host and narrator, Enrique Couto, and we have a terrifying piece of employment horror. I've lived a lot of employment horror myself, and I'm sure many of you can attest to a similar experience, but this one, it really takes the cake. But before we get to that, I just want to say thank you so much for listening. We're about to head into fall. We're about to head into spooky season, a time of year when Weekly Spooky truly shines. And believe me, we are going to celebrate October properly with so much bonus content, you won't know what to do with it. That's right, in October we're going to publish more than 20 episodes of Weekly Spooky, Terrifying and True, Monthly Spooky, Cutting Deep into Horror, all of your spooky favorites. Also, I had a fan kind of chastise me because I didn't mention that last week was my birthday. Well, it was. Some of you wanted to get me a gift, and I didn't really push it very hard. So, if anybody wants to get me a belated 37th birthday gift, head to weeklyspooky.com and click on Get Me a Gift. I would appreciate it, but at the same time, I just appreciate you being here. If you want to give me a gift that costs absolutely nothing, just go to your favorite podcasting app like Apple Podcasts or Spotify and give us a 5-star rating. That helps the show immensely and doesn't cost a single penny. It just helps more spookies find us. And if you want to join us spookies in our little community, just head to Facebook and search Weekly Spookies Tomb of Terror. You can hang out with myself, with the authors, with all of the other spookies, and share your favorite memes, ghost stories, and so much more. But now, my friends, I just checked the time and my shift is about to start. So, I better get to it after these quick words. I Hate Working at the Gas Station After Discovering Its Dark Secret by Michael Kelso. Every morning it's the same thing. People lining up at the pumps that seem to always be full. I've seen fights erupt when someone cuts line at the pump. And dear God, don't get in the way of them ordering their gallon-sized bucket of coffee to go with their pseudo-egg wrapped in dough and deep fried. Part of this nutritious breakfast. Every morning it looks like an army of ants on crack running around grabbing whatever food-type substance and drinks they can, then taking their usual position of impatiently waiting in line. I love the different poses. The watch watcher. They must glance at their watch every 2 seconds to show how much they're being inconvenienced. These are usually the ones getting into a Mercedes or BMW when they leave. I don't know why they don't get their breakfast catered. I'm sure they can afford it. The foot tapper. Usually they have something stuck in their ear and can't hear their order being called. The heavy sigher. Exhales loudly every third time the watch watcher checks the time, and when the foot tapper has to be told to move up in line. As if anyone could hear him over the music that's blaring so loud over the speakers, making it so easy for everyone. Did I mention I work here? Sometimes I wonder why after the things I've seen. Not just the idiots, but other things. Much darker things, but we'll get to that. Every morning I have to deal with these idiots. Is it still called road rage if you feel it in a gas station? As much as I hate them, customers are actually the easiest part of my job. I mean, who wouldn't want to get out in the middle of the night when the temperature is below zero and the wind is howling to change the bags and the trash cans because it's the appointed time? And who appointed the time, you ask? Why, the manual, of course. The corporate bean counters have done studies and run focus groups or some nonsense to decide the perfect time of day, or, in this case, night, to empty the trash. It's all in the manual. The manual is your friend. The manual is your God. The manual must be obeyed at all costs. That's what the manual says. So if it's cleaning the toilets, emptying the trash, washing out the coffee makers, the manual tells us exactly when and how to do it. That's a load off my mind. I don't even have to worry about not knowing how to clean a toilet. The manual tells me. What it doesn't tell me is what happens when the power goes out only at our station every night. At exactly 2:59 a.m. and comes back on at 3:01. I've seen this so many times. I watch the McDonald's beside us and their lights never go out. What's even stranger is the security cameras never seem to pick it up. I've reviewed the recordings. No loss of power ever shows. What does happen is somehow the timestamp on the video suddenly shoots from 2:59 to 3:01 like those 2 minutes never existed. The corporate techies call it a glitch and tell me to ignore it. The rest of us don't mention it, not if we know what's good for us. But I know why it happens. I don't tell anyone. For fear of being sent to. Is it corporate who keeps us shaking in terror at that potential of letting outsiders know what happens during those 2 missing minutes every night? Yes and no. It's something much closer, much darker. Something that could... I guess the best way to describe it would be to tell the story of Kenny. I know when I first heard his name, I did the famous line from South Park, "Oh my God, they killed Kenny!" It used to make me chuckle. I don't do that anymore. He started working here around 5 months ago. Wow, has it really been that long? Anyway, he was just another goofy teenager starting his first job after high school. Not that I was an elder scholar or anything. I only started here a year before Kenny did. He was fun to work with and we instantly became buddies. We loved to goof off during the night shift. Most nights it was just us working together. The place was usually dead from midnight until 5. We would rush around to get all our chores done so we had some free time. More than once we got into chicken nugget battles, which would have us cleaning up right before the morning rush help came on. We found out exactly where the cameras could and couldn't see and hid from them while we held our battles. We became so good at it that the night security guys would call to ask where we were. Yes, the corporate bean counters monitored us, day and night. Big Brother was always watching. More than once we discussed the option of tearing down the cameras and visiting corporate headquarters to shove them, well, in some very interesting and anatomically uncomfortable areas of management's collective persons. But as for what happened to Kenny, we were having one of our nugget battles when Kenny gave a shout. I went over to see what was wrong and found him holding his cheek. He said something sharp hit him. I told him I was just throwing nuggets when he looked down and found the offending object. He picked up a nugget that was broken in half, but there was something sticking out of it. There was what looked like a woman's diamond engagement ring. We debated back and forth how it could have gotten lodged in there when Kenny pulled it out and found the meat perfectly formed around it. "I don't think it got stuck in there," Kenny said. "I think it was processed this way." "That would mean," I said, "that someone was accidentally processed in the meat machine." "Are we sure it was an accident? Even as the words came out of my mouth, I knew how ludicrous they sounded. That kind of thing only happened in the movies. Didn't it? Kenny's eyes locked on mine, and I could tell he was thinking the same thing. I looked up and saw we were in the camera's view. "Stick that thing in your pocket, quick," I said. Kenny obeyed, and we went about cleaning up as usual, but I could tell it was bothering him. "Forget about that thing, man," I told him. "It was just some weird coincidence." "How many chicken nuggets have you eaten from this place?" he said with a haunted look in his eye. I thought for a moment, knowing the answer was much higher than I wanted it to be. In fact, thinking about the ring and the potential source for the meat in the nuggets made me feel ill. "Doesn't matter, I won't be eating any more." "What about that poor woman? And her family?" "What about her?" I said, my eyes nervously darting towards the nearest camera. "Doesn't she deserve more than that?" "What do you want me to do? Hunt down her family and tell them where we found the ring?" Kenny's eyes lit up. "That's exactly what I'm going to do." "Count me out of that, man," I said, hoping it would be enough to give him second thoughts about it. He shrugged and went about his cleaning duties. But from that moment on, he changed. Every time he was on break, he would be looking things up on his phone. More than once I glanced over and he was looking at missing person sites and making notes on ones that were in the area. The longer he investigated this, the less he was interested in anything else. I swear it was like he was slowly turning into a zombie. All he did was stare at his phone and make notes. One day I came in the break room and he was just sitting there, motionless. His eyes were open but focused on some point off in the distance. It was the creepiest thing I'd ever seen. "You okay, Kenny?" I said. He slowly turned toward me, like some possessed doll. "I'm fine." Okay," I said. "I know who she is." Who is?" "The woman whose ring we found." "Okay, who is she?" "She worked at the distribution center." "You mean the company's distribution center where we get all our products?" He nodded slowly. "How did you find that out?" I asked a lot of questions. "Asked who?" He stared at me with an intensity in his eyes I'd never seen before. "People." "What people?" He turned slowly and looked up at one of the cameras. "It's not important," he said, looking away from the camera and resuming his unfocused stare. "You okay, man?" "Yeah, I'm fine," he said in a monotone voice. "It's just..." I waited for a long moment for him to finish his sentence, but he just sat there, like someone had hit his pause button. "Just what?" I said. He jumped like I had startled him awake. "What?" "What do you mean, what?" I said. "You were talking and just stopped." "I did?" "Yeah." "What was I saying?" "That's what I was trying to find out." "What?" "Yep." "Yep?" "No, what?" "What?" I shook my head in frustration. "Never mind," I said, walking away, leaving him sitting there, staring into space. I couldn't figure out if he was messing with me or if something had happened. Had he really been tracking down where the ring came from? Had he really run across some people who had scared him so bad they turned him into this zombie? I decided it was time for some answers. After our shift was over, I followed him home. Only he didn't go home. He drove to the distribution center and parked on a secluded spot outside the fence where his car wouldn't be seen. I waited for him to get out of sight before I parked my car and followed him. He stalked through the woods outside the fence for a while until he came to a section that came apart when he pulled it. He slipped inside and I followed suit after he was out of sight. I came around the corner of the massive building and found him sitting at a picnic bench, smoking a cigarette. I stayed back and watched, shocked that I'd never seen him smoke before. I wondered why he would break in here just to smoke a cigarette. The answer came quickly. The door of the warehouse opened and 3 people stepped out. I held my breath thinking he'd been caught. But he was calm and continued to sit at the bench, In fact, the people who had come out began talking to him. He even offered one of them a cigarette. It was then I realized they were in the same outfit he was wearing. The company didn't have different uniforms for those who worked at the stations and those who worked in the distribution center. They chatted for a few minutes, then they all got up and went back inside, Kenny included. It was brilliant. He slipped right inside, no fuss, no muss. I figured, what the hell, it worked for Kenny, as I walked up and sat at the same picnic table. I didn't know how long it would be until the next break, so I tried a different approach. I knocked on the door. For a few minutes, no one answered. Each time I knocked, I became more anxious that a security guard would show up and arrest me for trespassing. Finally, after knocking, the door opened. I stepped back when I saw a security guard standing there. I hesitated. "Well?" the large man said in a deep voice. "Well, what?" was all I could think to answer back. "Well, are you going to come in or not?" It took my brain a moment to comprehend what he'd said. "Sorry, yeah," I said, diving through the door. He shut it behind me with a loud bang. It sounded like my doom. I knew he was on to me. He was just getting me inside so he could contain me, and I couldn't get away. I stood there, vapor-locked, unable to move for fear of what the guard would do. He stared at me, his eyes boring into mine as though sucking every secret out of me. "What do you think you're doing?" he said. I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do," he said, folding his arms in front of his massive chest. "No, I promise, I don't know anything," I said, hoping my knees wouldn't start knocking. "All right, enough of this," he said. I started to shake. I'd never been to prison. In fact, I'd never gotten in serious trouble in my life. And now, here I was, breaking and entering, even though I didn't really break. I just knocked and entered. I wondered if the judge would take that into account. "You've had your break, now get back to work," he said. I stared at him, dumbfounded. "Excuse me? You heard me. The company doesn't pay you to stand around. Get back to work." "Yes, sir," I said, feeling the weight of a prison sentence lift from my shoulders. I took a step, then stopped. "Which way is it to where they process the chicken nuggets?" The guard rolled his eyes. "Frickin' newbies," he muttered. "Follow the red line." He pointed at the floor where several different colored lines ran down the middle of the hallway and disappeared into the distance. "Thanks," I said, quickly following the red line away from him. It led down a long hallway and right up to a large set of double doors that read, "Processing." I looked left and right, but there was no sign of Kenny. I stepped in through the double doors to a huge room full of conveyor belts. I looked around, but it was impossible to tell anyone apart when they were wearing hairnets and face masks. I hadn't made it 2 steps until I heard, "What do you think you're doing?" Don't go away. Weekly Spooky will be right back. A woman dressed in a white lab coat accosted me. "You know you're not supposed to be on the floor without your hairnet and mask on." She shoved a hairnet on my head, then hooked a mask around my ears. "Now, where's your station?" I said, my eyes darting around as she watched me impatiently. "How long have you worked here?" she said, seeing my indecision. "First day," I lied. She sighed heavily. "You're not even supposed to be on the floor yet. You have videos to watch." I shrugged. "Wait here," she said. "I'll go find someone to take you upstairs and start your videos." I waited long enough for her to leave the room. Then I roamed around trying to find Kenny. I walked past line after line of people sorting through the chunks of meat, tossing aside parts that weren't usable, or at least weren't usable for the main product. The bad parts were tossed into plastic bins. As I walked by, I saw some interesting things in those bins. There were little pieces of shiny objects, dark blobs I couldn't identify, rocks, loose change, and I swear I saw a finger. As I passed, the people on the line took a second away from their work to shoot me nasty glances. I guess having someone stare over their shoulder who wasn't a supervisor was taboo. As I walked by, someone grabbed me and pulled me over to the line beside them. "What the hell are you doing here?" Kenny hissed. "Looking for you," I said. "Okay, you found me. Now get out of here," he said, going back to sorting. "Not until you tell me what's going on," I said, standing beside him and sorting pieces of meat. "If I promise to tell you everything later, will you leave?" I hesitated. My curiosity had been piqued. "What the hell is going on here?" I said, tossing a piece of rotten-looking meat into a bin. He sighed. "Later. We can't talk about it now." I grimaced, knowing that he wouldn't let me in on the secret. I glared at him when suddenly I saw the supervisor come back and look for me. "Promise me we'll talk about this tonight at work," he said. "I promise." I turned around and walked away from him. She saw me and made a beeline right for me. "What were you doing on the line when you haven't been properly trained?" "Deciding." "Deciding what?" "That this job isn't for me," I said, handing her my hairnet and mask. "I quit." She stared at me, jaw hanging open as I stormed off. I glanced back to see her narrowing her eyes in Kenny's direction. I made my way back out of the hallway and followed the red line back to where I had come into the building. I reached the exit door when I heard a familiar deep voice. "Decided it's not for you, eh?" I turned to see the security guard who had met me on the way in. "That job's not for anyone," I said. "Yeah, it's no tiptoe through the tulips." "What?" "It's an old saying, never mind. Why are you going out this way?" I suddenly remembered I was on the wrong side of the building. "I figured I'd walk around to get some fresh air." He narrowed his eyes at me. I went for broke and bolted for the door. I could hear him running behind me. "Stop!" he yelled, much closer than I liked. I didn't obey. Instead, I hit the crash bar so hard I nearly knocked myself backward. The door flung open and smashed against the outside wall. I hit the open air and was around the corner before I knew it. I flew through the brush up to the fence and panicked when I couldn't find the open section right away. He was still in pursuit, but further behind. He must have lost sight of me for a minute. I ran along the fence, pushing on it as I went and growing more desperate with every moment. If I was stuck inside the fence, it would lead me right to the main entrance and I'd be caught. I was sweating from running, but also from the thought of going to jail, when a section of the fence gave way when I pushed it. I breathed a quick sigh of relief as I dove through the open fence to freedom. I ran to my car, not even thinking about the brush that had torn at my uniform and skin. I dove into the car and took off home. Only once I was moving did I look back and see Kenny's car sitting there, partially hidden. I wondered why he was being so secretive. I wondered if I had compromised him by leading them so close to his car. As I drove, my breathing returned to normal, followed by an adrenaline crash. I barely made it home and fell into bed. When I woke, it was dark. I jumped up in a panic, not sure where I was, until I banged my foot off my nightstand and screamed in pain. Once I could breathe again, I leaned over and turned on the light. It bathed the room in an eerie glow that made me think someone was here. I looked at the clock and realized I was late for work. I didn't have time to change, shower, or anything. I just ran out the door and hopped in my car. The drive to work was a blur. I hoped I wouldn't get pulled over. When I got there a half an hour late, I got an earful from my supervisor about not calling in to tell him. I apologized and went about my nightly routine. "This isn't the military," he said as he headed out. "But if you show up looking like that again, I'll have to write you up." I wasn't sure what he meant until I went to the bathroom and saw myself. My uniform looked like it had been run through a shredder. There were tears all over the shirt and pants. My narrow escape through the brush had not been kind. I cringed at the thought of dealing with customers looking like I had spent the night fighting off wild badgers. In the end, there was nothing I could do. I'd have to get a new uniform to replace this one and use one of my backups. I came out of the bathroom and nearly ran over Kenny. "You ready to spill your guts yet?" "What are you talking about?" he said with a blank stare. "That's not funny," I said. "You promised you'd talk to me tonight." "I am talking to you." "You're a real comedian. Now spill it." "Spill what?" "I'm not laughing, Kenny. Talk to me." He looked at me, and his eyes glazed over. It scared me. "Are you okay, man?" I said. "I'm fine." "Okay, what do you remember about this morning?" His eyes went a deeper glaze as he fell into a 1,000-yard stare. He didn't say anything for a long moment, and then it was like he woke up from a nap and looked at me. I went home and went to bed. I took a step back from him. "No, man, no, you didn't." "I didn't? You went to the distribution center." "Why would I do that?" I tried my best to find any sign he was joking, but I couldn't, and I knew him well enough to tell when he was serious. He was dead serious and believed every word he was saying. "You told me you'd found something out," I said. "What?" "I don't know. You said you would tell me tonight." His eyes lit up with curiosity. "Did I tell you?" "No," I said slowly. "I was waiting for you to tell me." "I wonder what it was," he said, his eyes becoming unfocused. "Okay, man, you're scaring me." Just then there came a beep, telling me someone had ordered food. "I gotta get that," I said, staring at him as he stood there like a robot trying to figure out an equation. I ran to the kitchen and started preparing the order. When it was nearly done, I saw Kenny come to the register and ring up the customer. "Number 38, I called out, setting the bag of food on the counter. I glanced up and froze when I saw who came for the bag. It was the security guard from the distribution center. "So, this is where you really work," he said, grabbing the bag. He shot me a sinister smile as he walked out. My fear melted, replaced with anger. I ran out the door after him. "Hey!" I yelled as he reached for his car door. "Yeah?" I approached slowly. "What did you do to my friend?" "Who?" "The cashier," I said, pointing inside to Kenny standing there behind the counter, looking like a statue. Then got a scared look in his eye. "I have to go," he said, ripping his door open and diving inside. "What did you do to him?" I said, grabbing his car door and holding it open. "Get away from me," he said. "Tell me first." His eyes darted around. "I can't talk to you," he said, barely opening his lips and staring straight ahead. "Why not?" His eyes darted up to one of the many security cameras, then back to staring straight ahead. He ripped the door out of my hand, closed it, and roared out of the parking lot. I watched him go, more confused now than ever. I slowly looked around and for the first time realized just how many cameras were aimed at the parking lot. I went back inside and did my job for the rest of the night, trying not to let my eyes drift up to any of the cameras. I kept my eye on Kenny, too, watching for any stray glances out of character, anything that would tell me he was joking. I didn't see one all night. The longer he went, the more scared I became. When our shift was over, I offered him a ride home, but he said he would be fine and drove off looking like a robot zombie. I wondered if he would make it. I tried to sleep that day, but I couldn't get my mind to shut down. It hadn't been 2 weeks since Kenny had found that ring and started his quest for the truth. I got out of bed having slept maybe an hour and dragged myself to the bathroom when there was a knock at my door. I answered it, and there stood the security guard. "What are you doing here?" I said through bleary eyes. "Can I come in?" "I don't know. Are you going to arrest me for trespassing?" "Should I?" I started to close the door. "No, I'm going to tell you what happened to your friend." I stopped and reopened the door. He stepped inside, giving the place a quick once-over. "Okay, so what happened?" He asked too many questions. "What do you mean?" He sighed. "I've worked at that place for a while now, and one of the things I've learned is you don't ask questions." "I don't get it." "He showed up about a week or so ago. He just blended in and started working the line. Next thing I know, I'm hearing workers talk about someone causing trouble. I narrowed it down to your friend and tried to talk some sense into him, but he wasn't having it. That day that you pulled your escape act, they pulled him in and they had a discussion with him. And that's what made him go all zombie on me? You don't get it, the guard said. They drugged him. What? They have this drug they use that slowly eats away your brain until there's nothing left. Wait, they're killing him? That's the way it works. But why? He looked around the room as if searching for something specific. Do you have an Alexa or any other stuff like that? No, just my phone. Give it to me. I hesitantly handed him my phone and he proceeded to remove the battery. If they find out I'm telling you this, I'll be next. Telling me what? The chickens. What about them? They aren't chickens. What the hell are you talking about? They have a system. They drive unmarked white vans out into the streets, round up homeless people, and take them to the distribution center. Once they have them there, they give them a much more powerful dose of the drug your friend is on. It kills their brain within hours. Then they process what's left. I stared at him for a long time. So you're saying the chicken nuggets aren't chicken? I ran to the bathroom and vomited into the toilet. When I came back out, he hadn't moved. That can't be real, I said. That's horror movie stuff. You might be surprised how much stuff you see in movies is secretly real. So you're saying my friend was poisoned? He nodded. Because he asked too many questions. He nodded again. Then why is he still alive? I don't know. Maybe as a warning to you. Me? You were there too. That's how they work. They can get to you anywhere. They can slip it into your food or drink. They can mail you a letter with the drug on it. They can slip it on your car door's handle. It isn't just street people they grab. Protesters, whistleblowers, anyone who threatens their business. Do you know how many people disappear in this city every day? No. Let's just say they process a lot of chicken. What about all those workers? Wouldn't they know it wasn't chicken? They give them a lower dose, just enough to keep them from asking questions. I looked around the room. Okay, where's the hidden camera? His eyes darted around. What camera? The one for the reality show or whatever you and Kenny are in to prank me. You don't believe me? I don't believe you. He hung his head. I stuck my neck out to come warn you. Well, I appreciate the warning, I said sarcastically. He turned and walked to the door. Just keep an eye on your friend, he said, opening it. And watch out for white vans. He closed the door behind him. It was nearly time to go to work. I shook off the thought that was clinging to the back of my brain. What if he was right? I showered and dressed and made it to work on time. The shift was uneventful, except for my continual attempts to snap Kenny out of it. He didn't respond. It was just before 3 a.m. when I saw a white van pull up. No one got out of it, and I couldn't see inside because it had tinted glass. I shrugged it off and went back to my job, mopping the kitchen floor. The guard's words came to me as I was doing my chores. I looked back out at the white van, but it was gone. I shrugged and went back to cleaning. A few minutes later, I came out of the back room because someone was yelling. Isn't anyone working around here? An angry man raged at the counter. I'm sorry, I said. The cashier must be in the bathroom. I took care of him, then went on a mission to find Kenny. In his condition, he could have wandered off somewhere or gotten stuck in a closet. 20 minutes later, I was frantic. I hadn't seen hide nor hair of Kenny. I was even tempted to check on the roof, but the access ladder was still locked. It was starting to get busy and I didn't have time to search for him anymore. Between cooking and running register, I was falling behind by the second. I had a lot of irate customers by the time day shift came in and bailed me out. I was so far behind I stayed for an extra hour just to help them catch up. After my shift, I went to the supervisor. I'm worried about Kenny, I said. It's not like him to just disappear like that. Maybe he got sick and went home without telling you. Maybe, but then why is his car still here? He looked at the security monitors, and sure enough, Kenny's car was still sitting in the employee's parking lot. That is weird. Tell you what, if he calls in, I'll give you a call. Fair enough, I said, yawning. I drove home and fell into a deep sleep. When I woke, I felt more refreshed than I had in days. I went into work that night expecting to find Kenny there laughing at me for falling for such an awesome prank. He wasn't there. Instead, I had someone from day shift who had volunteered to work overtime. For 3 days, Kenny didn't show up. On the 4th day, I got a surprise. In the morning, I was making food orders when I called an order number, and the guard walked up to take his food. "Hey, have you seen Kenny at all?" I said. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" he said. "Ha ha, very funny, seriously." I leaned closer. "Do you think they did something to him?" "Who did what to who?" I looked into his eyes and let go of his bag of food. He had the same vacant stare Kenny did just before he disappeared. "You have a good day now," he said with a smile before walking out. I suddenly felt surrounded and alone at the same time. I glanced up at one of the cameras as its mechanical eye stared back at me. I stopped questioning what happened to Kenny. Deep down, though, I knew. They towed his car out of the lot. I don't know where it went to. Maybe there's a corporate car crusher for the vehicles of their victims. The worst part is they continue to get away with it. I wish there was some way I could prove what I know. But I can't. Without going into the distribution center and getting evidence, I've got nothing. I keep coming to work for some reason. I've started looking for another job. I've written this all down in hopes that someday someone might be able to use it. That they would read this and look in the right place to discover this horrible truth. I've been feeling more and more tired lately. Maybe it's just knowing about this horrible thing that's happened and having no way to stop it. I wanted to write more of what I remembered in my journal, but my thoughts seemed to slip away so easily. It's been a few days since I've written anything, I think. Or has it been a few weeks? I keep getting thirstier for soda. I'm glad the company lets us have free soda when we work. I keep looking up at the cameras for some reason, but I can't remember why. I read the words on these pages, but I don't remember writing them. I see a white van pull up. It must be a customer. It's nearly 3 a.m. I hope they come in before the power surge. Whoa, that was a chilling one, and a big thank you to author Michael Kelso for contributing his story to the show. If you want to check out Michael Kelso's work, he's a busy boy on Reddit. Check him out at horror_writer_1717. Now, pretty soon we're going to be telling almost exclusively scary Halloween stories because that's how we roll in October at Weekly Spooky. But before we get there, we have some pre-Halloween goodies coming right up. And if you didn't get a chance last week, make sure to check out our episode of Cutting Deep into Horror, where we talk all about The Host, the 2006 Korean horror film with a heart of gold. It's a bloody heart, but a heart nonetheless. I really enjoyed talking about it with my co-host Rachel, and I think you'd enjoy it too. We've been doing all kinds of new and exciting things here at Weekly Spooky, and we hope you'll join us and support us. The best way you can support us, of course, is Patreon. For as little as $1 a month, you would get exclusive content and know that you're directly helping keep the show going. And if you want to join us, just go to weeklyspooky.com, click on Patreon, and make it happen. And speaking of Patreon, I want to say an extra special thank you to our Patreon podcast boosters. These are folks who have contributed just a little bit more in order to hear their names at the end of every show. And they are Johnny Nix, Bobbletopia.com, Megan Hua, Julia Kirsch, Brent McCullough, Steve King, Karen Weemet, Jack Kerr, and Craig Cohen. If you want to join them and have your names at the end of every episode, go to weeklyspooky.com, click on Patreon, and choose any tier over $15 a month. But anyway, my friends, I've got to get out of here. I just finished recording an entire novella for you all. That's right, over 2 hours of vampiric terror has been recorded that you'll be getting completely free in October. And I have a lot more where that comes from. So, for myself, for my executive producer, Rob Fields, for my composer, Ray Mattis, and of course, my producer, Dan Wilder, I will talk at you later. And don't pick up any more graveyard shifts, my friends. Not at all.
Thank you for listening. Make sure to find your way back next week. But for now, you are safe. Trust me.